Welcome to the Audiation in the Wild podcast with your hosts, Beau Taillefer and Eric Rasmussen. Season 3, Episode 3, Tonalities and Harmony. Ooh, that's cool.
I'll have to take your word for it.
No, it's just a Lydian dominant. Chords on Lydian dominant. Which is what? It's Lydian with a flat 7 chord. With a subtonic. That's
which is cool.
That's a
cool sound.
Half sound. Half a sound. Okay, we're off to a good start.
It's funny, you can steal some of the stuff from Mixolydian or some of the stuff from Lydian. It's cool.
Yeah, there's no reason to be bound by these once you're really familiar with the content of, and the character of each tonality, right? And there's a lot of space for tonal, expressionism, tonality, as long as you're, I don't know. It depends what you like, right? Ultimately, you got to like what you hear. You're not going to write it, or you're not going to listen to it. But I like.
Well, in that case, it's really funny because, like with Lydian and Mixolydian, like if you look at them through the lens of like characteristic tones, I mean, when I think characteristic tones, as long as I'm hearing a minor tonic, and as soon as I hear a flat 7 as long as I'm hearing major tonic, as soon as I hear the flat 7. Like over the root, I'm thinking Mixolydian, and then Lydian, the same thing with the sharp 4. But with this Lydian dominant, you have the characteristic tones of both of them in one new, field, which is fun to be able to do. And that becomes, for me, its own little characteristic thing.
Tonalities. They're important.
Yeah, so Eric brought up something really interesting that we've talked about a lot, but I don't think we've had a full episode about. It's this idea of if we look at the hierarchy of the way the tonal learning sequence goes, there's often a conflation between melodic content equaling tonality, but if the hierarchy really is like tonality is the larger heading, and then out of that comes harmony and melody and melodic content. But there's a tendency for people to just work on melodic content, assuming that is tonality and leaving harmonic content aside. So Eric has a very practical example of this. When we establish tonality, I mean, there's a couple ways to do it. We could go, or Eric would prefer, or you could even go, you could do a combination, air quote, of those where you have something like. And so let's explore like why we should be doing all of these and what happens when you leave. I think more common is the harmonic side is left out, just because you can't sing it in the same way as you can sing a melodic side. But I think there's some skills that get left out when you don't learn to identify tonalities by functions, for example.
Yeah. And I've got a new practice too that I'm using, tonal patterns and functions when I'm teaching the kids songs that they hear every time, like the hello song that I use. But to your point, if you hear a melody and that's all you hear, you have to infer the functions. You don't know what the functions are. So if I'm reading a melody and the functions aren't part of the lead sheet or part of the, if the chord symbols aren't up there, I assume the simpler the better. Just your basic functions. People say that, what is it, Old Joe Clark?
Yeah.
Is Mixolydian, but you don't know that unless the melody at the end or the melody, if it's not there, if the chord functions aren't there with the melody, just because there's te in the melody, see that te is over tonic. if we're in major, it would be Tay.
Mm-hmm.
But if it Mixolydian, you know,
The phenomenon's actually really common, right? Where
the-
people assume if there's a single tone like that's like not part of the vanilla tonality, they assume that you've left, like for example, you've left major if you play anything other than do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti.
Yeah, so this is just a blues tone in that, because it's just fa. Fa, mi, re, do, ti, la, so, assuming that you're in Mixolydian. And the only way you can know that you're in Mixolydian is if there's a subtonic, and because there's some versions of, Old Joe Clark that only have dominant.
And then it can get even more complicated, because someone could actually hear the whole thing as major with the subtonic, which is different than hearing it in Mixolydian, right? So it can get very subjective.
And that would just depend on your listening vocabulary and how you've learned the song and like that. But but
I think this opens a really good point up, in the sense that what information are people using to determine what tonality they're in? Because you have two options. You basically have harmonic content or melodic content.
Harmonic is better than the melodic content, because it's just more objective. It's just flat out more objective. Now, what's more objective than the harmonic content is both harmonic and the melodic content. Put those together, and then people can argue about whether that function works this way or that way, like a dominant of the supertonic or a dominant of the submediant versus a dominant of, there's just one chord, like an A7 in C major, can function two ways. It can go to the supertonic or it can go to the double dominant, and or somewhere else. It can go to this. It can go to the fa chord. It can go to for sure. It could just go a half step up, which is another pretty normal progression for a dominant chord, or at least I think so, because it's in some of my repertoire in the book, and the kids hear it in different places in the repertoire that we sing. All right, so
this opens up a really cool just set of possibilities for training, in the sense that, one of the simple exercises I like to do is just play a familiar melody with no harmonic background, no functions being played, like play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star in major and minor, and guide people to identify the change in tonality just based off of that, right? So there's no functions helping people make a decision there. Yeah. But then you could do the opposite, where you drop the melody and you just play the functions, and you train people to identify the tonality based off of the functions. And those are really separate skills.
So I don't like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star and just play the melody, because that can be Mixolydian.
Well, this is actually another situation that arises that can be very useful, where you can help people, in the sense, if you play a melody, let's say you play, and you throw some chords under it. But you could also change that to, this is what Eric was talking about.
Yeah, it's the same melody, but now it's not. It's the same tones.
This is a great example
but it's not the same melody to me.
Exactly. This is a great example of the melodic content not being able to help people decide the tonality, because you had to listen to harmonic content there to choose what the tonality was. You probably, if I just played the basic one, you can subjectively learn to control what you're hearing there. I was hearing that as Mixolydian just because it's funny. But I consider that to be like the next step, in the sense where you take people through the first two, where you teach them to like have a familiar melody that's unaccompanied. You teach them to recognize the tonality. You change the tonality. And so in that circumstance, changing the tonality, like if I go like this, I was able to establish something like objective tonality without any functions. And so you can show people that that is possible to do. But this
Well,
circumstance that Eric brought, you have to be careful with, where with Twinkle in major and mixolydian, and you
well,
can even do other
the
things.
minor one you did, I was audiating Aeolian, so I heard subtonic instead of dominant, right? Like you
Yeah, I
can
mean, yeah,
superimpose,
yeah.
right, the less objective,
Mm-hmm.
right, functions.
And that's where,
So
this stuff
yeah,
gets really fun.
so here's where I start. So first of all, the kids have sung at least 4 songs in every tonality except Locrian. I still, I'm still a holdout. I'm still a holdout. Although the kids will pick it and they're getting listening vocabulary and Locrian a little bit, but we just um, but after they've sung right, and then I do with 2 and 3 year olds. Is this the right way or the wrong way, or do you want it the right way or the wrong way? That's the first one. So now they're just
Mm-hmm.
noticing differences. Do you want Itsy Bitsy Spider? Oh, okay, let's do Itsy Bitsy Spider. Do you want it the way it's supposed to be, or do you want it a new way? And and the kids will tell me what they want. And some kids really tolerate the new way well and find it really interesting. And the other one's like, blah, that can't. It's annoying and hurtful, practically.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the spectrum. And then it's like I can say, do you want it this way or that way? And I play, or I play, which way do you want it? The first way or the second way? And they'll choose what they want. And before I play, I'll ask them, is that the way it's supposed to be or the way uh, that's wrong, quote unquote? And they'll tell me. And then I'll that'll lead to, okay, well, this ends on do, and I'll do Mary had a little lamb as fleece as white as. I want you to understand this resting tone right here is do, and we've sung patterns before. But this resting tone is do. The itsy bitsy spider went up the spout. Did that end on do? Yes, that's same as Mary had a little lamb fleece as white as do. And then I'll do another one. The wheels on the bus go round and round all through the. Where should it end? And everybody sings do. I said, yes. Mary had a little lamb, itsy bitsy spider, wheels on the bus, all end on do. So I'll do all of the songs that they know that end on do in a short amount of time. And I say, is this the right way to do, Twinkle Twinkle? And they'll say, no, that's not the right way. And I say, oh, should it end on do? Let's try it. Yeah, that's do. Listen to this one. That's not where Twinkle should go. Twinkle shouldn't go that way. That's like Joshua fought the battle of Jericho and the walls came tumbling down. And I'll reference in a short amount of time, really again, there wasn't a woman, all skin and bones, or 2 little kitty cats lying in the sun. I'll play with you. And firefighter, we can't wait, out the fire goes. And I'll play. Now, which way would you like me to play London Bridge? Would you like that resting tone do? Or would you like that resting tone la? And I've gone through the same process with teaching them la is the resting tone for those songs as I did. I think I skipped a step or went too fast there for a minute. No. And I'll ask them to tell me resting tone do, resting tone la. Pick a song, resting tone do, resting tone la. Which do you want? Do you want it resting tone do, resting tone la? And they'll get to pick, and is that the right way or the wrong way? Now they're showing me it's almost identification, but it's more the recognition, right? That they're right or they're wrong. Right? So that's the setup for when I teach all the tonality names. And I kind of go through the same process with Dorian and Mixolydian on their own, or on separate weeks, where I have them go to the difference between, Dorian and Mixolydian, and I'll play all the Mixolydian songs in very short order, like just a Cliff Notes version of the song, so that they're hearing the functions and the melody, and just a portion of it, just to get them reestablished with songs that they already have sung for me. And this starts with, kids sometimes as young as 3.5, even 3, but mostly it's 4 is pretty young, and
Okay.
5. And certainly by, the kids in my, what I call my formal instruction classes. It's funny how I sneak formal instruction down earlier and earlier, but only for the stuff that they show me consistently that age group can do. So, so eventually, resting tone do, resting tone la. And I don't like using major and minor right off the bat. Because as soon as you open that can of worms, the kids now are left with, well, what are the others? And they don't know. But they can say resting tone T, resting tone, anything. It gives them access to do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, being each of those being a resting tone, a potential resting tone. So, let's do Twinkle Twinkle today. And what resting tone would you like to use? And I put all the resting tones on the board, and we go through each resting tone. And they get to just pick their flavor of the day for them. And after I play Twinkle in the wrong resting tone, I said it shouldn't be like that. It should be like this, right? I always reference back to the one that's proper. I think in my class we call it regular. I don't even call it the right way anymore. The way everybody knows it. But what I'll do for major, and you're close to what I do when you were introducing this idea, just 1, 5, 1 is enough to establish major, and 1 is enough to establish minor. And if there's a 4 chord in the song, I'll establish tonality that way rather than melodically. Sure. Unless you're away from the keyboard, then la da da dee da da bum is a perfect way to establish tonality, because you don't have harmonic, capabilities with you. You're away from something, ukulele or guitar or piano or whatever you want to use, but not to have the harmonic context explicit makes it more difficult for children to understand tonality. So you can't just use resting tone to understand tonality.
I agree.
It's one step, and I just did that. But when I'm being when I get on a roll with the kids and their understanding of tonalities, I go back and forth between or among tonalities, just playing. And listen, is this the same or different? Dorian, and now it's Mixolydian, right? So,
yeah.
So, and I'll go, so, re, do, re. Did I say re, so, do, re? I think I sang the right thing. And then so, do, fa, so, do, fa, so. Sing the roots. So, do, fa, so. And that's for songs like Grandma Has a Habit, or I Went for a Walk, Hoochie Coochie Dance, or Once There Was an Elephant, fa, so. And I'll do the familiar songs with those functions. And then I'll do the same thing with the Dorian songs.
Well, one thing I want to
So
just point out
don't
in terms of what Eric
blame.
is doing. Yeah, one thing I want to point out, Eric, is that when you're at the point now where you've done so much oral, and you're playing like these short snapshots, and you're of the tunes and the different tonalities. Like in the beginning, you had a bunch of major tunes, and you showed how they all ended on do. Before you even taught them the verbal associate do, they had so much listening vocabulary, and you showed them a ton of examples of the same tone, do in major, being in different songs that they already have in their
Mm-hmm.
vocabulary. And I think that is so important to recognize, because if people try to, like say in an instrumental lesson, skip all that listening vocabulary, skip all that comparisons, and just give a student like a rule like do is the resting tone, that is not
No,
audiationally going to suffice with what
no, you're
you're trying to
relating the
do with the next step.
information to a whole bunch of experience. And then,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
it's not resting tone do, resting tone la. Before that, it's the right way, wrong way. The way
Exactly.
it's supposed
Yeah.
to be. And that tells you a lot about a kid if they think it's right, even when you play it the wrong way. Um, and so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So there's lots of stuff to be gained by doing it this way along the way, because you pick up pieces you might have missed, and gaps in where the kids are audiating or not. But even before they're saying resting tone do, resting tone la, they're comparing like, oh, that's for, or I'll play 151 in minor. What song do you want to sing? And the kids immediately say Halloween, or something.
Mm-hmm.
They'll
Mm-hmm.
say something that makes them that the prompt, uh they'll some of them infer from that minor in their, or
Well, then that's the point I want to bring up, is that the kids can already tell what tonality is without knowing
the
anything about what a resting tone is or the
yes,
label of the resting tone. That is already learned before
yes.
that through a different kind of oral
It's
and like
it's the
comparison.
comparison thing, so that they're recognition before identification, like just recognize.
Mm-hmm.
And the way they recognize those things are different is through, this is this, this is this, this is this, this is this, this is
Mm-hmm.
this. What's this? Not
But then
that.
you
It's
introduce
something else.
this other level of precision afterwards, where you start pointing out specific tones, like the rest, like do in major, and you point out that that is the resting tone. That's another level that I think people try to skip to before doing all this background
And it's in a
learning of familiar
familiar
songs and
context.
comparison.
It's as a familiar context as possible. All their songs,
Mm.
any song that they know really well, that ends on do and is supposed to.
Because what's funny here is like the way that Eric just describes what he does is like a perfect presentation of who he's teaching. And I do something very similar, even though I'm not teaching kids as young as Eric is. Typically, I'm usually teaching kids that are more in the like 8, 9, 10 range on a piano, but I do something almost identical to what you're doing. There's a few little changes here and there. I teach the name of the tonality before I teach the name of the tones, but I think we're just splitting hairs at that point. The fundamental similarity is we're teaching familiar songs, and lots of familiar songs in major, lots of familiar songs in different tonalities. You said 4, which is a great idea of the volume of how many you're teaching before you start making comparisons. And that's a really good idea too, is like, it can be useful for many people to like have some time with this Mixolydian song not being altered, so it's really known as a Mixolydian song, before you start screwing with it and changing it. Because when they have a baseline of, these are a couple major songs that I know, these are a couple minors, couple Dorians, couple Mixolydian, they stand out in the memory more as familiar songs that represent that tonality. And you've always brought this up, where if you start making comparisons too early in the process, it can dilute that a little bit.
Yeah, kids need to be firm about understanding the tonal context intuitively, so that when you change it, they just have to have enough singing experience. Or
And then just to throw in the reason, the reason that I'm not using like la as the resting tone or do as the resting tone is because I prefer to do this, like especially on the piano and guitar, in parallel tonality, because it makes teaching, like if I switch twinkle from major to minor, I can do it in a parallel tonality, and so much of what they've learned is being retained. And I found at that level, teaching them the different tone of the different labels of the resting tone being la or do, it seemed to cause more issues than it helped with at that point. And so it was just a concession to that.
Yeah, I don't do relative, because I know I'm changing the. So say if I'm ending in D major, I end in D minor, and I do D Dorian and D Mixolydian when I'm comparing those, because I don't want to have them shift where the resting tone is, even though I'm shifting its name or the quality of that resting tone, or obviously the tonality. But the easiest way to get at those, once you've sung songs, and you don't have to have done patterns, but patterns will help if you're spending time to do that. I just find I get patterns to be much more easily learned if they know the essential functions for tonalities first. It's so much easier, and then the tonal pattern instruction goes gangbusters. It just goes so quickly if they understand those functions, and by understanding, audiating the functions, not necessarily labeling them, but just singing the roots, and then what I do is I have them also experience those functions, like just 1-5 or 1-4. Let me do it. Or and I arpeggiate instead of play block chords, and I do both, and then I write songs. What is it? Ian and Jack, the kids who live next door. Ian and Jack, the kids who live next door. Ian and Jack, the kids who live next door. So they're getting the tonal patterns and the functions, and they're getting the name of, and if you didn't catch it, Ian and Jack, the kids who live next door, Ian and Jack. Right? So that's just one cute way. I also have other cute ways that keep evolving. And then I have what's in my book is the story of, knock, 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 who's at the door? Ray. Why is Ray at the door? And then, because Ray is the resting tone for Dorian. What's he want? He wants you to mix him some soda with lime. Why does he want you to mix him some soda with lime? Because Mixolydian has the resting tone. So, so. And then, the story goes on all the way up to, look, he's having tea. Locrian. The alien says, look. Why does the alien say that? Well, the alien came down from the sky and went, la, 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 la. And why do you do that? Well, la is Aeolian, right? The alien. So I just, who's in the fridge? Me. Why is me in the fridge? And then I have songs that go with each of those too. The story and the songs bank goes together. So that's just another way of enriching that. Plus, it's really vivid, like a story for them, so that it's not dry facts like that. And eventually, after a few weeks or a couple months, they're pretty. They get pretty solid. 7 to 8 years old, they're pretty solid about interchangeably using the name resting tone la and the name of the tonality.
So yeah, just in terms, like, you went over a lot of stuff right there, and I think what's really important to highlight is this continual framing and linking between, like, the familiar songs that kids have sung at the oral level with this establishing tonality, little thing that you do, whether it's just with one or whether it's arpeggiated, however you arpeggiate them.
Yep.
You know, the linking of
And
all of those three things as being the tonality. I mean, that's what's important that people walk away with, is that like what's considered a tonality is not any one of those things. It's all of those things. The tonality is the larger space that all of those exist within. And I think part of Eric's effectiveness and, you know, genius, whatever you want to call it, is that you can't leave the harmonic part out. And it's so often, I think, left out. And even in terms of just listening exposure, like whether or not you're going to teach people to play a harmonic instrument, they still need to be able to identify and interact harmonically. And if you don't expose people to those sounds and guide them through that, it's likely that some people just won't develop that skill.
And they might not even need to identify it. You know, there's people who don't know what they're doing, but dang, I can't do it.
Yeah, I guess. I mean,
you know, the gospel choir, you know, the way that gospel choirs are taught, nobody knows what's going on. They just do it. And it's phenomenal. And, you know, we all wish we could do that as music teachers. I would hope, you know, or something akin to that. But the experience of being able to put what you know to language, right, just solidifies, you know, the synaptic trails, and supports the synaptic trails that have been learned either just through, you know, through audiation or through the combination of audiation. And I like to think of it as synesthetic in a way, right? Because you're thinking major. Well, the tonality pops up, like the sound of the tonality pops up in your brain as soon as you say major, if you have enough experience, right? The other thing that's really curious to me that we've gotten this far is like, what was the development of tonality? You know, how did we get there in the, you know, the 15th century? You know, it wasn't codified, right? The Council of Trent or whatever. I'm not 100% sure, and I'm not good at the history on it. But if you can think all the way back to, you know, it's all, everything is I was going to say monotone. What's the word? Monody. Monophonic. But, you know, just one. You know, now you've got two melodies at the same time, but is there, you know, what was the tonality?
Well, you can see a bit of this historically, just in terms of, you know, even just the evolution of European classical music, in the sense that clearly there's a lot of melody, and then counterpoint started, and they started trying to figure out, okay, well, we can, if I do this melody, like you can do that tone while I'm doing this tone. And then at some point that just hit a critical mass where harmony was fully abstracted out of that as its own.
Yeah.
And that's what I see as like the
rebellion against the church, because, you know, certain intervals weren't allowed, and, you know, the devil's music and all that. And then eventually Palestrina, you know, it's so beautiful, but how do you go through that and analyze it purely through tonality when there's a lot of subjectivity going on? And yet whatever Palestrina had in terms of tonality, you know, I wish I had that.
we brought this up a little bit on the podcast, but like you have like melodic content and harmonic content, and there's a dance and an interplay between the two. I was speaking with a student this morning who was saying she can clearly identify harmonic progressions, but this is the kicker. It's not necessarily from the harmonic gestalts. It's because she's using certain voice leading patterns or the bass lines as giveaways. So I would argue that
oh, cool.
That's a great skill to have, by the way, to be able to do that. Yeah. But that is different than the skill of just being able to take bing, bang, boom, 3 chords and know that that's Mixolydian without referencing specific tones or specific voice patterns in that. And, you know, as another thing, like there are certain, what I'm getting at is this melodic content and your knowledge of functions and harmony, they start getting glued together in a certain way. So if you take this, if I go, depending on where your harmonic knowledge is, some people can hear a chord going with that tone. I hear.
Oh yeah.
I hear that. Or
Yeah.
and the more kind of trained your harmonic faculties are, the more functions you can hear as being relevant to that. I mean, you might even hear this.
Yeah.
You might hear that as being an outside tone of the 5 chord or an actual tone of like whatever, the 5/5. And that these games that Eric's playing where, you know, he's going like this or like that is how those things start getting linked up in the mind and not being like super distinct categories. It's not like your brain has one mode of operation called harmonic gestalt and then another operation called melodic functions. I suspect that at some kind of primitive neurological level, that is what's happening, but they start getting glued together in a way.
Yeah.
And
so with my 3-year-old class, some of them are just turning 4. And I had them almost all of them for 2 years or 3 years.
mm-hmm.
And one of the things I do is in my hello song, you know, it's like I go, and that's kind of just my announcement. We're getting ready to, you know, to go here. It's kind of like a brass fanfare, just 4, 5, 1. Here we go. And then we sing, I go, uh-oh, no, uh-oh, no, uh-oh, no, uh-oh, no, yes. And then I'll do, so now I'm arpeggiating, and I can do, you know, and I arpeggiate not the same way each time. I just let them, they're just experiencing that. And I go, uh-oh, no, uh-oh, uh-oh, no, uh-oh, uh-oh, no, uh-oh, no, yes. And then they're absorbing that, having heard it all the year before, but now they're absorbing it in a different way. And I'm having them sing tonal patterns on the names of the functions.
Mm.
And I'm not sure I'm combining it all. I'll know later. I'm not saying that's the best way yet. I still like all the other ways I'm doing, but this is just an exercise at the beginning of class that happens almost every day with all the kids.
Yeah, I mean, there's something that I've played around with a lot. If you take, you know, basic melodies, this part of Twinkle, you can go unaccompanied. You can go accompanied. You could go,
Yep.
And
yep.
all those 3, I butchered the last one, but those 3 are really good to do. And I find it helps point out the fact that there's something similar piercing through all 3 of those.
Yep.
And this is the great point where when you fully metabolize all those, this sounds different. Because you can imply functions onto it. I like putting the 4 chord on this. Eric doesn't like that, apparently. Not yet.
Not yet. I mean, I don't mind it. I just don't want to change. I don't want to throw a curveball to the kids, because one of the things I like about Twinkle is Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. I get them to go, no, yes, no, yes. Right? And then up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky, is not no, yes, no, yes. It's yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Then what? Yes, no, or no, yes, no, yes. And the kids always say, no, yes, no, yes. And that's the coolest thing about Twinkle that I've rediscovered this year. It's like the no, yes, no, yes. It's no, no, right? And then yes, no is yes, no, yes, no. Yes, no, yes, no. So it's like where the strength of the beat on on the functions.
And the
So,
form
because
is, right?
yes, no, yes is different than no, yes, no, yes, no.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like in the same rhythmic context. And it's not just rhythmic, uh, it's phrase, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And they start to understand harmonic, right, progressions, not just the patterns. The
Mm-hmm.
patterns are just no, yes, or yes, no, or you could go no, yes, or yes, no, yes. And those patterns, unless you have a dangling no, which is fine. No, yes, no. But I don't use that very often, just because it's, it lingers in the air, which is fine at the end of, there's a what's the name of this song? It very popular, super popular Chinese folk song. I forget what it is offhand right now.
Ends on the 5.
Oh, I have to look it up, I guess, because my brain doesn't work with that way. Um, it's all in my playlist. If anybody wants my playlist, let me know. Butterfly Lovers.
Mm.
Uh, it it ends on a no because the love continues forever.
It's cool when you
It's
see
like
songs
some
in
of.
major and minor that start on the 5, like this.
Oh yeah,
But it's cool. You don't see that a lot.
yeah. At, the standard tune Avalon. Uh, yeah. I, found my love in Avalon and sailed away. Anyway, that's one that starts on the 5. It's nice to find songs that don't always start on 1.
Mm.
And that's great to show kids, hey, you don't have to start there. Another thing I do is I have children tell me what they want to play. So Christmas time is coming. And one of the things I did many years ago is I hammered in, uh, tonic, dominant, subdominant, double dominant for September, October, November. When it turned December, I taught a couple Christmas songs like so do, right? A fa fa fa, a do, a fa fa fa, do, fa, so do. Was that right? No, do. Sorry. I stopped audiating. Oh my god. Uh, fa fa fa, do, fa fa fa, do, so do. Let's better watch out. Better not cry. Right? Uh, and then I said, okay, let's do Silent Night. We've never done it before. Where should I start? And show me your fingers. And have the kids, first of all, they have to have known the song. I didn't teach them the song. And I had the kids, guess the wrong function or the right function, whatever they did. Uh, and then they correct themselves. And what a great exercise that was, because they were really inferring, this is we're now, total generalization.
Yep.
Generalization harmonic.
Yeah, and I mean, a
And
ukulele is so powerful for this too. Like once kids can recognize and maybe identify some functions, you put a ukulele in their hand, you teach them 1, 4, 5, and then you just teach them a song, and say what functions go with this.
yeah,
9 times out of 10, they come up with the same functions as other kids when they're dialed. So there's something really cool going on there at the generalizing
yeah,
level.
yeah. So let me see. Let's do a little bit more. So I did kind of Dorian Mixolydian, and earlier I did major minor. When it gets beyond that, like I'll do, all right, let's do resting tone fa. And we do all our songs and we sing them. And I'll mi, so, fa, fa, so, fa, so, do, fa. And we'll sing the roots, and I'll play, 3 or 4 real, like same things I did before, short order, Lydian song, another Lydian song, and I'll maintain the parallel, uh, keep the D as the resting tone, for example, which I'm actually playing, and then I'll say, let's listen to Twinkle That Way. And that seems to help solidify fa as the resting tone. And I just find that really especially good for that one. And then Phrygian, it's just its own animal. And I like to compare it to Aeolian, or I like to compare it to minor.
Phrygian compares so well to Locrian. There's so many, like, it works so well. Like, if you have Phrygian, if you have Locrian, Phrygian,
yeah,
Locrian. That'd be a melodic comparison, right? I'm highlighting characteristic tones.
I don't have a lot of repertoire. If they don't have the listening vocabulary, I don't go there.
This kid that I taught piano to last year, when I was requesting repertoire and hunting in his listening vocabulary for video games and all this stuff, there's a video game song that was in Locrian, and he played it all the time. It was hilarious.
Far out.
Yeah, but I mean, you could have conceptualized the song as like it could have been a couple other things. Like, you could have heard it as minor with like this flat 5, so maybe like, right?
Yeah.
And then it had this little, and to me, rather than saying like, well, it's minor with a flat 5 and then it went to Phrygian, it sounds more reasonable to say that was Locrian.
Yeah. So just to be clear about Phrygian, I do the same thing. You do mi, sometimes I do mi, la, re, mi, but I like fa. I just fa, re, mi, or fa, mi, re, mi. And I say that's like way down south where bananas grow. Or I'll say, leaves are falling everywhere and jump in the leaves. Night has fallen, time to go to sleep in your bed. Fa, mi, re, mi. La is less important.
What are you saying, Locrian? You sang the flat 5. We're acculturating Eric to Locrian.
Did I? La.
So just so everyone knows, I can't actually hear Eric's piano, so I'm trying my best to audiate what he's saying.
My singing is terrible. Yeah, that might be one of the reasons I developed this, is because I'm bound to the piano. If you're going to ask me to sing songs, I get anxious about doing it away from the piano. Just because it's now my crutch. It's part of my body. You ever see this guy that hears color on the TED Talks?
Yeah.
He's got a camera on him. It's like, I should have a piano tied to my brain.
But I mean, it's what you're saying. I mean, we're training synesthesia, and there's different kinds of synesthesia, right? There's the audiation gets linked with your visual system and your tactile system, and then even the conceptual system gets linked to that. It's all
this guy's born in a black and white world, right? And never saw anything but grayscale. But once they hooked up and I'm curious, like, it's got to be pretty arbitrary to decide what tones or what color right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, we're going to make this color this tone. And he hears, so they, each tone is a particular hue, right? And he,
Yep.
right? And at some point, he said, this is when I became a pure uh, half robot, half man kind of thing, cyborg, uh, is when he said he started dreaming in color.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty powerful. So yeah, I want a piano to be
I've heard
like
I've heard of
his
multiple
camera
people with
is.
perfect pitch say that a D sounds yellow to them.
Yep.
I don't know why
Yeah.
that is.
There's well, the famous one I remember is Scriabin. He had colors associated with tones, but how is that different than tonality?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely have images and emotional flavors associated with certain functions and certain tonalities, right? Like this chord we always talk about on this podcast. This chord here, minor 4, half diminished 2, minor 4 6, whatever you want to call it. This sounds very fragile to me. That's what I think of, like an innocent fragileness. And that's kind of like emotional synesthesia. And that's often more useful for calling out harmony when you're not calling it out by a specific tone. Like if you're not going to say that that's the 2 chord or that's raised the bass of that chord in major, what's your gut emotional reaction?
Yeah. Well, the limbic system's got to get involved at some point, and then beyond that, the way that connects to your motor control and the hindbrain and all that down to the spine. It's like, what, you know, I think it becomes, everything that we do becomes some kind of a mush. I don't know that can you can you taste a tree without licking it? Like that color, that tree tastes like, I don't taste and sight and movement and all those. Where do they really overlap? And movement and the limbic system and the auditory system, they all, right?
This is
They
something
all
though that a
kind
lot of
of have
younger
to,
musicians are missing out on. Like when you discuss phrasing with them, you might describe it metaphorically, like something needs to flow more or something needs to be punchy, attacky, right? And even in the like the bringing in body movement, it's like another type of synesthesia that you're adding to their audiation
yeah,
ability. More metaphors can be added, but a lot of the time students, when they're caught at like the very literal level, they're just like playing tones on a page, they're trying to just push keys on a piano down, they're missing these like metaphorical qualities in the phrasing, like something needs to be looser or
yeah.
grow in intensity.
They didn't move enough as a young child.
Yeah.
They didn't listen and get danced with as much, or whatever, the nature nurture. But this strayed from tonality, but I think it's hooked all together, and tonalities do have different feelings for different people. But I think there's a lot of style choices that can be made outside the parameters of the typical MLT, uh, the repertoire.
Yeah, fair enough. And the quality of the tonality changes pretty radically depending on the style of phrasing and the meter that you choose to go with it. Like minor can sound horribly miserable and depressive when it's played and in a certain way at a certain tempo and phrased in a certain way, but at a higher tempo, it can sound quite aggressive and confident and the complete opposite, that's
Yeah,
another
yeah,
crazy thing about music is it's like these associations we make, like minor is sad. It doesn't really hold up in all contexts for sure.
yeah. Although the kids come in and tell me that all the time now, but I think it's based on their experiences with the movies that they're watching, and minor is always when it's scary or sad or whatever. So they've already connected the emotion with minor.
I'll never forget, Eric. This kid, I taught him to recognize the difference between major and minor, and I said, "What does this one sound like?" And it was the major one. He's like, "That one sounds like my grandma's music." And then he thought minor was cool because I guess his previous piano teacher, this kid's probably like 7, the whole book was major songs, the whole book. And
Sounds
so
like my
I just
grandma
started teaching him a
sings
ton of minor songs, and he's just so into it. And that's like one of the biggest hacks I'd say for beginning piano
it.
players.
Yeah.
Kids like minor a lot. Like they really like it. They think it sounds
Oh,
sneaky or
they
mischievous.
like anything. They
Yeah.
like anything if they have experience and they're given access to it without the
Mhm.
heady words and or whatever.
Yeah.
They could, yeah, it's pretty silly.
Well, and that's kind of the nature of
But
play, right? Is making discriminations and screwing around with it. I
yeah,
mean,
play. Where does play? Yeah, that's so we got synesthetic. We need to get into the nature of play. Synesthesia. What else can we add? We can do. We'll just keep going for 12 more hours and we'll be done
the
for next
nature and
year.
influence of psychedelics on music making, which is a very
Well, they're
serious
doing that.
discussion.
They're doing it at Hopkins.
Yeah. Um, which would be an interesting conversation, you know.
All right. Can we leave it there
Yeah,
or
that sounds
more?
good. Well, I mean, I think that sounds
Okay.
pretty good. But the final thing I wanted to say is like, you know, when you're teaching yourself to audiate more things, whether you have an instrument or not, I mean, that's the game is making discriminations. And once you learn how
Yeah.
to make discriminations in a playful way, the thing just takes off.
Yeah. Well, that's where improvisation and composition come in. If
Mm.
you're teaching yourself, force yourself to improvise and compose. And if you can't do that, then go back and sing tonal patterns. Buy my book and sing all the songs in my book.
Mm.
But all right. Very good.
All right, till next time.
Thanks, Bob.